PT is the most tedious boss fight within Warframe in my opinion, so the fact that I've been having a fair few people ask for advice on the Profit Taker is not a surprise in any way. So in today's video we'll explore the optimized builds and strats for farming the giant spider boy for that sweet credit profit. Now, I only think running PT is worth it for credits, so I won't be exploring builds for speedrunning PT. Though for those out there that do speedrun PT, you are absolutely nuts and I can't understand you. I'll be using, talking and exploring Chroma PT running for the credit boost that Chroma gives. Something that everyone can do and get some great profit out of, because barely anyone seems comfortable with running PT normally. So the goal for today is to add you to that list of competent PT farmers. One of the main reasons in my opinion that a lot of players never bother with PT farming is due to the big requirements to even get to the fight to begin with. To fight PT you need to be rank 5 on Fortuna. It's like DE thought, we created this awesome boss, how do we stop anyone from ever seeing it? It takes a while, but if you grind to rank 5 Fortuna standing then you need to complete the PT questline. At least the questline is relatively easy. The boss fight on another note is incredibly tedious, especially when you're first learning it. PT as a boss, if you don't have the right gear or knowledge, can be extremely painful to fight. I personally remember hating the boss fight and avoiding it at all costs, because who wants to deal with this absolute mess? However, nowadays I'd pick PT over index farming just about any day due to the difference in knowledge from starting to now. Before we get into the actual boss fight, if you are new to the channel or are enjoying these guides, please consider subscribing. I know that every YouTuber asks you to, but it genuinely helps. Only a small percentage of viewers are subscribed, so if you could check that you are subscribed, it would mean so much. Either way, I hope you enjoy the video. Now to the boss. PT has a phase system, pretty similar to what you'd expect from most boss fights in practically any game to stop them from being absolutely paper enemies. I'm looking at you, Sergeant and Hyena Pack. PT on the other hand attempts to fix this with shield and limb phases. During the shield phase, the front of the Profit Taker shows a symbol, and this shows what the boss can currently take damage from, being completely immune from any damage not shown on the front of its head. It's only ever one element at a time, which is why when we get to the build section, you'll see a wide array of different elements and build choices that for normal gameplay would look really strange. Once you deplete the shield, you are then able to pull out your big dick arc gun and take out its legs. This is the limb phase. There is only one other phase, and that is the Pylon Phase, in which the PT shoots out pylons which you need to go and destroy to be able to continue the fight. Now, the order of phases sort of goes in chunks, and it goes a bit like this. For phase 1, we start with a shield phase. For the shield phase, all we have to do is watch the symbol that comes out of the front of the Profit Taker and then hit it with the element that it is showing. When you manage to take that out, the limbs will become vulnerable, so we go and take those out with an arc gun. When we have all 4 limbs down, a pylon phase will start, so we have to go out and destroy these pylons. These will be randomly shot around by the PT, so there is no set places that these will spawn. Destroying these pylons can be done a few different ways. Most players will simply run around destroying them with melee, as the pylons have a shield around them preventing you shooting them. However, a good old Zenith, when it's in its semi-auto fire mode, has infinite punch through, giving it the ability to shoot the pylons through the shield and even the mountains, from any standing position, as you can see on screen right now. It's incredibly useful. If you don't own a Zenith, you should probably be using your operator in this phase to try and get to the pylons as fast as possible. And I would normally suggest using your amp to destroy the pylons if you have a good amp, as it's just faster than swapping in and out of operator. If not, just destroy them normally. Once gone, this leads straight back into another limb phase, so go straight back to the PT and get rid of those legs once again. Sometimes at this point your arc gun might be on cooldown. If it is so, you can skip the cooldown if you find the crewman that is carrying an arc gun. It drops ammo which reduces and removes your cooldown of your own arc gun. This is when we hit the phase 2 chunk. It sort of starts again. We have to do a shield phase once more, leading again into a limb phase and then a pylon phase. Practically a repeat of phase 1, except you don't have to destroy the limbs twice. The final phase, or phase 3, goes again with a shield phase and then a limb phase. However, when this limb phase is complete, that's it. You've now completed the PT. It can be sort of hard to wrap your head around, and nothing will teach you better than getting some practice on the boss itself. But if you break it down into these 3 main phases like I have, it can make a bit more sense. The abilities of the PT and the fight in general can be a bit tedious, but I personally like how unique it is, and that being able to do it takes some level of skill compared to 99% of Warframe's content. Now, obviously no guide is complete without a full set of builds, so time to go through the full setup that I use. Know that getting getting a full proper setup for PT does take quite a while, and a large majority of the player base won't have all the required items, but that's okay. Provided you understand how the fight works and understand why I build the items the way that I do, you can translate some of that to other weapons and still manage to do the PT fight just fine. So the general idea when setting up a loadout for Profit Taker is you want weapons that do a really nice amount of damage that you can also make do a large array of elements. The more elements that you can cover, the less likely the boss will bring up an element that you don't have. And obviously more damage is better because bigger number, better person. The gear I use is Chroma, Zenith, Kuvan Ukor, Plague Kripath with Contagion, and the Imperiator Vandal. If you don't have a Zenith, Battlecore can be a good replacement. If you don't own a Kuvan Ukor, you can replace it with the Rattleguts. If you don't own a Plague Kripath, you can run any Zor provided you have Contagion. But even if you are missing gear, provided you build the gear understanding the reasoning behind how we mod them, you'll be fine. Let's go through the build starting with Chroma. We have Speed Holster as our aura mod. The reason being is that during the fight we'll have to constantly swap weapons to get the correct element type. Being able to swap gear faster obviously makes this more efficient, and that in turn makes the fight much faster. We also have Prime Sure-Footed as the Exilus mod. PT as a boss fight has a mass amount of staggers and ways to knock you over, so being able to negate this is important. If you don't have this, you could put on Handspring in this spot, as it makes you get up faster if you do get knocked over. When running Chroma, we want to put a priority on strength, duration, and survivability. So for strength we have Blind Rage and Transient Fortitude. We are then running Narrow-Minded for duration and Streamlined for efficiency. We have Vigorous Swap for that extra swap speed, which is awesome, and we also get some extra damage from it. For the element you should always run on your Chroma, I use Heat for extra health for survivability. For Arcanes we want to use Arcane Avenger for crit, and Arcane Nullifier to keep all of our energy. For the Zenith we'll be covering Corrosive and Cold elemental types. For this build it works out like this. We run Split Chamber for multi-shot. Now I have a Riven in my second slot with multi-shot and crit damage, but if you don't have a Riven, you can put Vigilante armaments in this spot. We then run Vital Sense and Point Strike for crit chance and damage. For elemental mods we run Stormbringer, Infected Clip, and Primed Cryo Rounds, or use the normal one if you don't own the primed version. That gives us the two elements that this weapon will be covering, remembering that we need to plan to cover as many elements as possible. We then finalize that with Primed Bane of Corpus to multiply all the damage mods within this mod setup. With our secondary, we use the Kuvan Ukor, specifically a magnetic Kuvan Ukor, as this is a free dual element right at the start, which is fantastic for elemental coverage. This weapon is the bread and butter of this. For modding, we start with Anemic Agility for fire rate, as fire rate is basically straight bonus damage for a laser. Easy choice. Multi-shot comes next, and we run Lethal Torrent and Barrel Diffusion for that. Multi-shot is straight extra damage, and Lethal Torrent has the bonus of extra fire rate. For elemental mods, we run Pathogen Rounds, Deep Freeze, and Primed Heated Charge in that order. Now something cool happens. We already had magnetic damage by default because of the Kuva weapon. Radiation is also a default element of the Kuvan Ukor. Cold and Toxin mods that we added means we'll also get Viral, and then Primed Heated Charge does fire. So in a single weapon, we've just covered 3 dual elements and a single normal element, which is insane. We add to that a Riven. My Riven is fire rate, multi-shot, and crit chance. If you don't have a Riven here, you could replace it with Primed Pistol Gambit, or the normal version. We finish off the build with Primed Expel Corpus, or the normal variant if you don't have it. Again, it's to multiply our output on the PT. For the melee, we want any Zor with Contagion Arcane. In my case, I use the Plague Kripath. When in the fight, all you have to do is double jump, glide, and melee, which throws a projectile that does massive damage based off the mods on the weapon, which make clearing the shields pretty quick. Your stance here does not matter, so take my choice with a grain of salt. The build is a bit different because of the focus on the Contagion. For the build here, we have Primed Fury for attack speed, Sacrificial Steel, and Organ Shatter following up with crit damage. We also have Primed Fever Strike, Shocking Touch, and Molten Impact for our elements. That gives us gas and electricity. In the final slot, I have a Riven, which does attack speed, crit damage, and heat. The heat is added onto the gas damage. Make sure that you have the electricity as a separate element. If you don't have a Riven, feel free to replace this with whatever you think works best for you. And last but not least, we have Primed Smite Corpus. The faction mods are so good that we are guaranteed to use them on each build. For the arc gun, I use the Imperiator Vandal. The reason I do so is I have a really good Riven for it. However, the Musalon outperforms the Imperiator Vandal without Rivens, so we'll explore that in this video. I will link the Imperiator Vandal build, however, in case people who are watching have a Riven and would prefer to use that. Either way works. So let's have a look at the Musalon build. Now once again we run multi-shot, this time with dual rounds. Not a common mod at all, so most of you may not have it. I pair this with automatic trigger as fire rate is just straight DPS increase. We drop in the crit mods with Parallax Scope and Hallowed Bullets, followed by our lovely elemental mods. And for our arc gun, we want to use Combustion Round, Electrified Barrel, and Venomous Clip, so we can get Toxin as our extra element, as that's the only element not covered by our main gear. It's kind of just there to be safe. In my final slot, I have a Riven with Corpus damage and crit damage. However, you could replace this with either the dual stat mods for Toxin, Fire, or Electric to boost the damage slightly, or put ammo chain so that your arc gun timer is slightly reduced. And those are all the builds. So a quick summary on how we break down the elemental coverage. Our Zenith covers cold and corrosive. The Kuvang covers magnetic, radiation, viral, and heat. The Zor covers gas and electricity, and the arc gun is there for toxin. As you can tell, that covers every element. Now, if you need to change gear as you don't own something, at least you can see how the loadout is planned to cover all or as many elements as possible. All you need to do is something similar. Covering all may not be possible for most people, but the more you can cover, the better. If running with others, they could always cover elements that you may not have. Now, this fight is tedious, like I said. From my description, you should understand how the fight works, but obviously there are small optimizations and things you can do to make the fight just a little better, faster, and easier. So I'm going to just put out a few tips that I have learned from credit farming and playing with other experienced PT farmers, and hopefully some of these tips may be able to help you when giving PT a go. Something that I have never seen any content creator really talk about is changing your hotkeys so that you can quickly activate gear. Now, as PT is heavily gear related with Arc Wing, Arc Gun, and maybe even health and energy pads for survival, having hotkeys could save mass amounts of time for you. So what I suggest doing is setting up your gear wheel with any gear that you may want, and then map those gear wheel controls to keys. This is in Options, Key Bindings, and further down there are gear hotkeys. As you can see on mine, I have a fair few hotkeys. I highly recommend, even if you don't do too much PT, to do this, as it makes things in general much easier once you get used to all your hotkeys. As you can see in the background, in none of the PT fight clips do I ever open my gear wheel, and hotkeys are the reason. Another thing that can help with survivability that I never really see all that many people doing is using the operator to make surviving easier. When in operator mode and crouching, you are invisible and can't take damage. So if you're taking a fair bit of damage or need to quickly dodge, simply pressing 5 and then crouching will keep you alive. You can also then dash using the operator, which can fling mobs away, clearing more space to reduce incoming projectiles and damage. Speaking of the operator, if you ever get an element that you don't have, or don't want to swap to the arc gun to kill the shield, by shooting the PT with your operator amp, it will swap the element. Remember, however, that you can only change it after 4 seconds of an element phase has passed. This also brings me into positioning. When fighting PT, there are 3 different spawn locations, but very general advice is to place yourself directly in front of the PT. Not too far away, otherwise PT's abilities will knock you backwards, but avoid going underneath the PT, because the PT will play an animation where he smashes the ground, as you can see. This can make limb killing hard and can slow down the fight dramatically, so try to avoid this at all costs as well. And lastly, as if it wasn't obvious, PT is not a pick up and easily kill it immediately type of boss. It requires decent gear, it requires a good bit of knowledge, and if you're running it quickly to try and farm credits, it requires a lot of practice to get good times. There are other builds and ways to fight PT, however I use Chroma because I only fight PT for credits. If you enjoy PT and are wanting to look into speedrunning it with Saren strats, I suggest giving the speedrun.com top entries a look and understand how they farm PT. I do hope that the video helps. If it has helped you, don't forget to like and subscribe. If you have any more questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. Hell, maybe you run this differently to me. Either way, I hope you all enjoyed the video. Have a dope day, much love, and Robo out.